Of course, a noble from a small and remote country, and even the heir to a simple count's family, might not be the ideal candidate for the princess of a great empire. But Byron was now a wanted man, not the emperor of the empire. If he acted prudently, who knows what could happen in the future? Of course, there was no guarantee that the rebellion would succeed, so he had no intention of taking any concrete steps, such as compromising. I was simply planning to boil a young lady so that it would be easier to cook her. Not because he was her son, but objectively, Gerald had an attractive and manly face. He was tall and handsome, and a typical, friendly guy. It's exactly the same as when I was young. The Count looked at his son with satisfaction, remembering his past self, who had made many women cry. Women of that age were very naive by origin, so they quickly fell in love with a handsome man who treated them a little better. It was a strange collaboration that arose from the Earl's prejudice against young women and confusion that Isla was Byron's biological daughter. Yes, I understand. Gerald, who until a moment ago had kept his mouth closed with a sullen expression, nodded unexpectedly and replied, "Why are you so docile?" The Count thought it was something very strange, but Gerald, who was already showing great interest in the unknown young woman, planned to do it even without his father's request. But it was added with the justification of being a paternal order. Gerald raised the corners of his mouth slightly as he remembered the beautiful young woman with the fresh expression he had seen during the day. I don't know if he liked the food. After a great welcome banquet for Byron and his party, the Earl, alone with Byron, poured wine into his glass and asked him. It was a precious drink that he hadn't been able to drink for years for fear of losing it, but when Byron said he was a drinker, he thought it was an opportunity and took it. Well, it wasn't bad. It was the first satisfying meal I've had in a long time. All thanks to the Count. Byron, who had eaten heartily and had finally found a decent place to stay, accepted the drink the Earl offered him with a rather cheerful expression. I'm glad you're satisfied, hee. The Count laughed cowardly, flattering him as if he had just removed his gallbladder. It was truly a spectacle. The Count has been very considerate, and one day I will return this favor. I will keep my promise, no matter what. Byron took a sip of the fragrant wine and smiled sinisterly. He hadn't felt this good in a long time. About that promise. Although Byron seemed to be in good spirits and boasted about keeping his promise, Count Senespon's face instantly darkened. A moment ago, he was smiling as if he had no ulterior motives. It was something I couldn't understand. What's happening? Byron put down his glass and stared at the Earl. I had a feeling that something was wrong. Well, that has become difficult. The Earl's support for Byron's betrayal was, in fact, for the benefit of the heir to the throne, whom he supported. As the Palace Empire became the hegemon of this continent, it was natural that whoever received the support of the emperor would gain an advantage in the fight for the throne. However, Emperor Hiram of the Palace Empire had maintained an attitude of non-interference in the internal affairs of neighboring countries since the beginning of his reign. It was an extremely frustrating policy for Count Senespon, who wanted to put the person he wanted on the throne, even asking for loans from foreign powers. The Duke of Back has been in trouble. He got caught gambling with relief funds, and now he's exiled to an island. The Duke of Back was the youngest son of the previous king and half-brother of the current king. Unlike the current king, who was born from the body of a maiden, he was the late son born from the queen's womb. He was 20 years younger than the current king, so he could almost be considered his son. The previous king was very happy when the Duke of Back was born and wanted to put him on the throne, but when the Duke was 3 years old, he died suddenly of illness, and the current king, the eldest son, ascended the throne. Some nobles believed that the current king, with his illegitimate mother, was unworthy and that the Duke of Back was the true heir to the throne. Count Senespon was one of them. But then the Duke of Back fell from power. Because of that, the forces supporting the Duke had been practically destroyed. They were really reckless. They were so passionate about not accepting a low-born man as king, but now they joined the king as if nothing had happened. Count SYNOPSIS scoffed. He said they had neither loyalty nor courage. With that, what happened? The count must be in a difficult position. Yeah. I have many worries. I am deeply moved that your highness recognizes you. He pretended to look even more pitiful, raising his eyebrows and giving a disgusting smile. But what Byron got in response was an unimaginable reaction. What are you worried about? If I ascend the throne, it will not be difficult for the Duke of Back to ascend. Or perhaps an earl, not a duke, could take the throne himself. Yeah? Ascend the throne himself? It was a reckless, unimaginable idea. The count was so surprised that the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Have you never thought about it? Your Grace, your distribution is not as extensive as I thought. Byron chuckled, finding the earl's reaction amusing. He took a sip of wine, anticipating the repercussions his comments would have. It was really fragrant and sweet. The count remained silent, absorbed in his thoughts. He drank sip after sip of the wine he had resisted drinking, but his throat was dry. It was true that he hadn't thought about it. But if I thought about it carefully. Not bad, right? No, it wasn't that bad. It was a pretty tempting offer, and honestly, I was a little greedy. A slight smile appeared on his face, flushed with alcohol, and Byron, watching him, understood what it meant. His words had resonated. Do you like your accommodation? I don't know if there's anything uncomfortable about it. The count asked with a smile on his face, which had become much calmer. It was not an evasion intended as a denial. It was a response to a grateful offer with even greater hospitality. And Byron knew it very well. Well. As for the discomfort, there is nothing in particular. No, one thing occurs to me. Byron smiled as if something had occurred to him and opened his mouth. My daughter's room can only be locked from the inside. Could you put in a new lock so it can be locked from the outside? Hey? In your daughter's room? The Earl asked with wide eyes. Why on earth would he lock his daughter in her room? As a father, it was really incomprehensible. Of course, he also felt a pang of frustration every time he saw Gerald rebel, saying that he had developed quite a bit of intellectual capacity, but he never thought of locking him up. Oh, that's true. Since we are in the same boat, I will trust my Earl and tell you a secret. At the Count's reaction, Byron laughed lightly, closed his eyes and smiled sweetly. That girl is not my biological daughter. She is a hunting dog that I am raising. A very useful hunting dog. Oh, she doesn't know, so you'll have to keep it a secret. It was a smile so bright and beautiful, and at the same time so inhuman, that it gave him goosebumps. The Earl felt a brief pang of fear at the sight, but that fear was soon overcome by another emotion, disappointment and despair. I wasted my time. He was full of excitement about having the imperial princess as his daughter-in-law, but when it turned out that she was not his biological daughter, he felt a deep emptiness. Well, I'd rather be prince of a country than of an empire. The Earl, who wallowed briefly in the void, quickly overcame him, smiled broadly, and filled Byron's empty glass with wine. He considered the drunkenness of that night the most significant of his life. Isla's life didn't change much after moving abroad. She was locked in her room early at dusk, woken at dawn, and endured rigorous training. His routine remained the same. Of course, after realizing that Byron's curse was weighing on her, her attitude became much more cautious. It was natural. He had to survive, at least to take revenge and atone for the harm caused to his parents. However, despite her complex mind, her master's attitude had softened a bit lately and he had become much more tolerant than before, so she felt much calmer. Same as now. Let's rest for a while, miss. When did you bring it? Cloud asked, touching the armrest of the metal chair. Beside him were 2 steaming cups, evidently filled with cocoa, judging by the sweet chocolate aroma. "Thank you, I'll enjoy it." Isla sat in the chair and accepted the chocolate he offered her. It was a completely new experience to sit in such an exotic garden and enjoy free time while watching the spring flowers starting to bloom. Isla leaned back in her chair, trying to enjoy the moment, until she felt a prying gaze on her from somewhere. It was the annex garden, located deep in the Earl's estate, and it was a place of strict security, with entry prohibited except for a few trusted servants. What a sight to sneak into a place like that and spy on someone. Cloud also felt the gaze and, without saying a word, ran towards the bushes where he sensed a presence and pointed his sword at the intruder. "Who are you?"